Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the launch of the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission. In a moment, I'll introduce the chair of the Connected Places Catapult, who will set out the background and rationale for the commission. But before I do, just a few words of housekeeping for those that are on the event. The event is being recorded and will be made available on the Connected Places Catapult website after the event. After the initial presentations, there is a panel session with the opportunity for you to post questions to the panel. I encourage you to do that. You can use the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen. I encourage you to do this, and when we get to that session, I'll try to get through as many questions as I can. There's also a networking event immediately after the formal proceedings end. I encourage you to stay around for that, and there'll be a bit more details in the chat as we get towards the end of the event about how to do that. So keep an eye out for that. But that's enough from me. So let's get underway. And with this, a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Greg Clark, who, amongst many things, is the chair of the Connected Places Catapult. Greg, over to you.
Great. Well, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon to everyone. And let me say a big welcome to those of you who've joined us for this event. 300 people were registered. I hope you're all here. You're very welcome. And as well as my role as chair of the Connected Places Catapult, I'm also the group advisor on future cities at HSBC, and that keeps me busy enough. But I'm here today representing the Catapult. Now, we're here today to launch a new partnership that has a very specific purpose. The partnership is between the core cities, that's Belfast, Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Nottingham and Sheffield, and London councils, the 33 London local authorities, including the City of London Corporation, the City of Westminster and others. And it's a partnership with the Connected Places Catapult. We're really honoured that we're working together with this amazing group of cities that represent between them 44% of the UK's population, 50% of the UK GDP. Now, this partnership will also be engaging with the UK government, with the financial sector, with many cities, investors and developers. And this afternoon, you'll be hearing from L&G and from Grosvenor as well. Now, we have a clear intention for this partnership. What we want to do is to raise and accelerate the rate of investment in the net zero paths for UK cities. We're trying to crowd in capital for a just and accelerated transition. Now, you will shortly hear from the leader of the City of Glasgow, Councillor Susan Aitken, the host city of COP26. You'll also hear from Niall Bolger, the Chief Executive of the London Borough of Hounslow, here representing London councils. And Susan Aitken, along with the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, the Mayor of Hackney, Phil Glanville, and the Deputy Chair of Policy and Resources at the City of London Corporation, Deputy Keith Bottomley, between them and we're chairing this initiative and we're marshalling it through our board. It's a multi-party effort, and we're really looking forward to making a difference with this. Now, Susan and Niall will talk in some detail about what this means locally and about the research. But let me just say, first and foremost, this collaboration has a long-term intention, but it's also addressing some urgent and immediate priorities. Let's just think about the context in which this is occurring. If we look back over the last couple of hundred years, the UK was the first nation to industrialize and to create industrial cities. It was also the first nation to deindustrialize and to have deindustrialized cities with the multiple challenges and legacies that brought. It's a highly sophisticated, ambitious and innovative financial sector in the UK, and yet this is coupled with a very centralized public finance system, where there's much more limited scope for our cities to raise their own revenues, to invest, to save, and to generate, as it were, capital within their own balance sheets. Therefore, there's quite a big premium in the UK on bringing together, matching and linking city governments with private finance, with the assistance of the public sector, and in particular national government in doing that. And so therefore, this requires really some very special conditions for that to work well. Now, our assessment today is that the availability of finance and investment on its own, as it were, the supply side, is not the key issue. And there are other things that are already in train. The science of decarbonisation is now very, very clear. And when you think about how cities decarbonise, the Centre for Urban Transitions has done excellent work on that topic. Public opinion and citizens are also greatly in favour of rapid decarbonisation. All of the opinion polls and the voter intentions show us that. At the same time, government has now made a clear organising priority around net zero, particularly with the hosting of COP26. And we've seen the financial sector, the financial markets and institutions really taking forward their commitment here, particularly this week as they've launched the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, which you'll be hearing more about. But the key issue is how to translate all of this into effective investment in cities at the local level, in the combination of assets and platforms that cities bring. How do we translate all of this opportunity into a real investment register for cities? So CCIC, the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission, is going to try to do 8 things in a purposeful way over the next period of time. Firstly, as you've heard, we're bringing together the major UK cities and the finance community to have a sustained dialogue and to try to develop some new approaches. Secondly, as you'll hear from Niall shortly, we are going to identify and quantify the amount of investment required for net zero strategies in cities to be realised. Thirdly, there'll be this sustained engagement with the financial sector to seek solutions, opportunities, and new platforms. And when we say the financial sector, we mean all investors in cities, including the real estate community, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, fund managers, and so much more. The fifth thing we're going to do is to seek and find means to aggregate what the cities are looking for in order to simplify the investment equation for the private sector. In other words, we'll be looking across the cities to identify where we can bring together opportunities to give them scale, give them critical mass, and to de-risk them actively. Now, we're also going to be in all of this process advocating for help from central government to make it easier for investment to flow. We'll be recognizing and addressing some of the key transition risks. We'll be promoting very actively the demonstrators and the accelerators that we create so that they can scale up. And finally, we'll be seeking to optimize the enterprise, trade, and investment opportunities for UK PLC that come from finding purposeful, concrete solutions to city investment for net zero strategies. So there will be some key milestones that you'll hear about today. There'll be other milestones at COP26, but over the next couple of years, we intend to make this a program of collaboration that will deliver real investment into UK cities, and we won't stop until we've been successful at doing that. Now, why do we need to do this? It's rather obvious, I think, that sector strategies, which are being very actively pursued at the moment, are essential, but they're not sufficient for decarbonisation to occur. The financial systems and institutions are gearing up, as we've already heard, and there's an investment requirement now of something like $100 to $150 trillion worldwide. But it will be much more expensive if we wait. So we need cities to be a really active part of this process of investing in decarbonisation. Cities are paradoxically both, of course, emitters of carbon through all of the activities that occur in cities, but cities are also potentially victims of climate change as well. 500 cities worldwide, for example, are vulnerable to a half-meter rise in sea levels that would occur if we exceeded the 2 degrees of global warming that was agreed in Paris. So cities have a real incentive both to address climate change directly and also to prepare themselves for being more able to be resilient to the challenges that we face. Now, cities are important in this because they are great population concentrations, as we know. They're economic and trade hubs. They're clusters of high-value assets. They're places where different sectors interact. They're, of course, systems of systems. They're hubs of innovation. They're decision-making centers. They're places where citizen behavior can be changed and influenced more easily. They're platforms for convening around innovation. And of course, they're influential brands and trendsetters as well. So cities have a key role to play. And by 2080, of the 10 billion people who will be living on the planet, 80% of them will be living in 10,000 cities. So there's no real alternative to well-run, low-carbon cities if we're going to have 10 billion people living on a finite planet. So there's now a clear understanding of what it takes to decarbonize a city. The Coalition for Urban Transitions has been working substantially on this agenda for several years now. And for those of you who've had a chance to digest their reports, you know that they've identified that the net zero city is clean, it's connected, and it's compact. And they've identified how electrification, how materials efficiency, how mixed land uses can be catalysts for achieving cities that are able to completely eliminate carbon over time. Now, in our view, what this calls for is effective place-based strategies and place leadership to complement the sector strategies and sector leadership that we've already seen. So what is it that these place-based strategies need to do? Well, firstly, they need to set ambition and accelerate the agenda. And we've seen this, of course, in Glasgow, which you'll shortly hear about. But we've seen it, for example, in Copenhagen and Oslo very much in the last period of time. The innovation is accelerated by cities setting a clear ambition. We also know that cities can inform and shape citizen choices, for example, around waste and recycling, around retail and consumption, around mobility choices, and they can shape market responses via land use planning, via procurement, via their supply chain activities. Cities have a big role to play in shaping citizen consumption, citizen behavior, and market behavior as well. Cities also play a key role in optimizing the integration of different sectors. Perhaps this is between public and private sector, or between mobility and energy, or maybe real estate and waste, finding the ways in which these sectors can work together at the local level to accelerate the decarbonization process, but also to leverage the multipliers that come in terms of jobs, investment, placemaking, and everything else. Cities can also play a critical role, in fact, the lead role, in reconfiguring places to be appropriate for low carbon modes of activity, whether that's transport, logistics, nature-based solutions, energy storage. It's the quality of place and the way that place is shaped, managed, and curated that makes decarbonization possible in many instances. City governments can also play a role as place leaders in making investment opportunities more visible and de-risking them where possible. City governments can play key roles in scaling up opportunities through aggregation, something that this commission is going to focus on in a very detailed way. And they can also focus on securing what we might call the extra benefits of decarbonisation. The jobs and skills benefits, the air quality, exercise and health benefits, the new facilities, the savings that can occur from decarbonisation and the reinvestment process. So in all of this, we see place leaders and place strategies as a critical complement to sector strategies and very important for our commission. Now, coming to the end of what I want to say, when all of this is done, we believe that optimizing investment will lead to places that are more able to decarbonize rapidly and will be more investable, with multiple investors able to crowd in. When multiple locations have these features, a much more vibrant market can evolve and emerge that brings together cities with capital. And if you think about it, over the last 20 years, this has happened in all sorts of other ways. 20 years ago, we didn't have the kind of vibrant student housing market that we have today. The private sector has developed that market with assistance and support from city governments. Only a little while ago, we had very few real estate companies focusing on green buildings. That has really emerged strongly in the last period of time, as well as, of course, the big drive that's happening now on clean energy. So equipped with the confidence that these case studies give us, we believe that we can now inject some pace and some scale into the investment into net zero pathways for UK cities. We plan to do it in ways that engage private financial institutions, developers, investors, and many more. And we plan to use this to build and shape new markets, both to attract investment into the UK and to promote UK expertise and ecosystems into international markets. I invite everybody who's here today to join us in supporting the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission. We look forward to working with you, and thank you for being here with us today. Andrew, back to you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Greg, for a fantastic overview about the incredibly important role that cities are playing and will play in addressing the climate change challenge, and then really emphasising and articulating why the Commission is so very much needed. So thank you very much for that. Don't forget to post your comments and your questions in readiness for the panel later on, get them into the chat function. So let's move on now and hear from one of the Commission board members. That's Councillor Susan Aiken. Susan is a leader of Glasgow.
Okay, so I started off by saying how delighted I was to be able to join the launch of this initiative, which I do think has the potential to become genuinely catalytic in our ambitions for net zero and climate resilient cities. And I would really like to thank Core Cities and the Connected Places Catapult for facilitating the Commission. It really couldn't be more timely. Glasgow's road to COP26 has been a busy one, as you might imagine, and it's been obvious from our regular engagement with our peers that the global solidarity in addressing the climate emergency is genuine and substantial. The context and the scale may differ in different cities across the world, but the challenges are more or less the same. And I think it's important and indeed galvanising for us to know that. And we also know where action is needed. It's around our energy systems, transport and mobility, the emissions from homes and businesses, providing the jobs and skills for the new green economy, green infrastructure and behavioural change. And we know the scale of the opportunity. The Treasury's own net zero reviews already highlighted net zero as the pro-growth strategy for the long term. But it's now apparent that one of the most significant agendas confronting UK cities is the financing of transition. And the next decade is going to be critical in delivering the net zero carbon interventions necessary for transition. We're talking really about a requirement to rebuild our cities so that the very systems on which we depend, from energy to food, housing to transport, are decarbonised. And finance is the key lever that makes all of that happen and that unlocks transformation. But finance also raises some difficult questions. Who's paying for all of this and who shoulders the burden? How do we connect local democracy and place-based solutions with global finance and regulatory frameworks? And crucially, how do we do all of this at a scale and pace that only a few cities have experienced in the modern era? In Glasgow alone, we are looking at interventions with upfront costs estimated, and these are only rough estimates just now, at around 30 billion. And with a net zero carbon target date of 2030, which is 15 years faster than many of our UK peers, that's a lot of investment to find over the next 8 or 9 years. So the purpose then of the Commission is to address the deficit of poorly developed pathways, to help mobilise finance and to drive investment into low and net zero carbon projects. But what we also recognise already is that finance in itself isn't actually where the main blockages are. Rather, it's in the ability of cities to create the robust business cases and business models at a scale that allows private finance to flow. By bringing the plans of cities together, we can present investment propositions at the scale and volume that are much more attractive to investors and articulate our individual and collective offers. And engaging with the private sector can also help cities better understand and address the opportunities and challenges that financiers face when exploring where and how to invest double-digit billions in relatively untested technologies in a very fast-moving environment. I talk a lot about the focal point that COP26 provides of the importance to cities like ours in the Core Cities network and in London of the lead-in almost as much as the event itself. So it's entirely appropriate that Glasgow should also serve as a critical milestone in this agenda. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the full investment challenges and opportunities laid out more at the COP. It will actually be exactly 4 months from today that the first formal day of COP26 will be concluding. The momentum now is tangible, and it won't be long before it's really going to dominate the global news agendas. The sheer scale of COP's ramifications can be a wee bit overwhelming at times, and so too is the thought that the name of my city can forever be synonymous with the moment that the world properly committed its efforts towards a cleaner, fairer, safer and more prosperous world. While we're making good progress reimagining our future on our road to COP, we're also telling a really compelling story about Glasgow's past and how that's shaped our present and our future. So for those of you who are maybe a bit less familiar with Glasgow as a city, we were a birthplace of the first industrial revolution, with our proximity to natural resources turning a small port city into a titan of the 19th and 20th centuries. Glasgow built the ships that enabled an empire and carved a brand synonymous with industry and innovation. But the decline of heavy industry in the late 20th century heralded a dark chapter for us of social and economic devastation. Glasgow, though, has re-emerged. We are a resilient city with an international reputation for culture, for sport and hospitality. We've got world-class universities, and we are becoming a world leader in new low-carbon economies within digital, science, technology and other sectors. But the legacies of that high carbon past still loom heavily. The closures of industries left scars and pockmarks of derelict and often toxic land across Glasgow, an ongoing blight and a barrier to prosperity and to well-being. Scotland's busiest stretch of motorway was carved right through the heart of our city, while the failure to plan either economically or socially triggered waves of generational worklessness and poor health. Transition is nothing new here in Glasgow, and we've got visible reminders of the consequences of failing to manage a transition fairly and equitably. None of this is unique to Glasgow, though, of course, and these challenges are typical of a great many industrial and post-industrial cities, and so too are the solutions. And in many ways, Glasgow's typicality marks us out as the ideal host for COP26. In November, given the increasing appreciation of the critical role of cities in delivering the climate agenda and the focus on the practical measures to achieve net zero, there is a generational opportunity for cities like ours. We've got the platform for a shared narrative on those specific interventions needed for transition, but also to create the opportunities for the necessary investment. None of this, though, is to dilute the importance of place within this. While we need a common stepping off point, ensuring that we're ready to deliver this on the ground in specific city settings is vital to the success or otherwise of the Commission's work. Each city has its own strengths and contexts. And the UK, of course, comprises devolved nations with different policy and legislative contexts. Aggregation doesn't mean uniformity. One of Glasgow's successes in recent years, and one that's really coming to the fore within our climate agenda, is the strength of city and regional partnerships. We've had town and gown come together with business and civic society to better shape and inform the policies that are demanded by a successful modern city. And that cross-sectoral coalition has again been mobilised to help Glasgow's path to net zero by 2030 through our Sustainable Glasgow partnership, while our Climate Ready Clyde initiative is fostering regional collaboration to adapt to climate impacts. And a city and region where everyone is pointing in the same direction really can help us overcome barriers, including around how we attract and sustain investment. That team approach also helps to inform a properly connected and systemic policy agenda that addresses both Glasgow's long-standing social, economic and environmental challenges and identify where these intersect with our modern sustainability agenda. So, for example, over the 4 years of the administration that I lead, we've developed the case for an entirely new public transport mode, the Glasgow Metro. And Glasgow Metro is in part a response to over-reliance on the private car and the emissions generated by that. But it's also something that can support inward investment and inclusive growth by connecting poorly served communities to employment, training and social opportunities, building their economic and climate resilience and opening up underdeveloped areas and that land that's been left derelict from our past. In Metro, not only do we have a shovel-ready project that can address immediate needs, but also transformative, low-carbon, climate-resilient infrastructure to target these long-term challenges. And to complement and build on the work of the Commission, Glasgow's just published our own green investment prospectus online today, in fact, at investglasgow.com/green, highlighting investable, sustainable projects that address both our long-standing challenges and our climate targets, as well as wider sustainable development goals. The prospectus is also being informed by the Commission's work, providing that golden thread down from that collective UK city offer to the site-specific detail that investors engaged by the opportunities presented by the Commission will want to see. We've been actively planning with colleagues and partners across industry, academia and the wider public sector on establishing investable propositions that make the best use of our land for creating sustainable jobs, affordable and energy efficient new homes and high quality green space, and to ensure that Glasgow builds on our existing reputation as an attractive and investable global location. I want to conclude by making a few brief points which I believe are better made now at the outset of the Commission's journey. I'm sure that, like me, other city leaders recognised a while ago that the unparalleled scale and complexity of transition means that it was never going to be delivered by governments alone, whether at local or national level, that we were always going to need to mobilise the private sector and find creative financial solutions along with them. But democratically elected city and local leaderships must, I believe, forge relationships that are more than just simply enabling the private sector. Our potential partners in this agenda will want a return for their investment. That's obvious. But that must be also in response to the needs of our cities and our citizens. When it's come to big existential societal goals like putting a man on the moon, fixing the ozone layer, or indeed now responding to COVID-19, the state plays a crucial role in creating value and prosperity for public and private sector alike. And climate change is another example of this, but with risks and rewards of an unprecedented scale. The direction of investment is crucial to a just and an orderly and equitable transition. And it's equally important that the cost of transition doesn't unfairly impact on the lives and the well-being of our most vulnerable citizens, those who contribute least to climate change but are most at risk from its impacts. And it's something I know that others involved in the Commission recognise, and which will doubtless be part of our conversations in the months ahead. Perhaps Glasgow's best received and most applauded message on our road to COP has been that nation states pledge, but it's cities that deliver. And we've reached the stage where cities will be in the driver's seat to deliver the gains in the climate agenda. We know that there will be huge costs here, figures we have little or no experience of dealing with at municipal level. But those costs will be dwarfed in the years ahead if we do nothing now. Cities have the ambition to meet the challenges of transition, and the Cities Climate Investment Commission will ensure that that ambition is clear-eyed and informed. This agenda has the potential to define Glasgow and our partner cities in the Commission. So thank you for listening. Apologies for the technical blip at the beginning, and I look forward to welcoming you, as many of you as possible, to Glasgow in person this autumn. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much indeed. Superb overview of the challenges and how Glasgow is thinking about them. Lots to take away, but your point about the need to involve the people who are living and working in our cities in the transition process is so crucial to achieve the legitimacy and I think to encourage the innovation that we will need in order to achieve a successful transition. I think it's just a really important point that we should keep in our heads as we move forward. So thank you very much indeed for that, Susan. Let's move on to our next presentation. That comes from Niall Bolger, who's the Chief Executive of London Borough of Hounslow and is a steering group member of the Commission. Niall, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you so much for that incredible presentation from Councillor Aiken in relation to the context of the Commission and the objectives that have been set for us by the Chair, Greg. So I'm going to talk today about the work which we've commissioned as a Commission from Eunomia and Bankers Without Borders to understand the scale of the opportunity within the UK cities. So if we go on to the next slide. So some of the context we're working within, which will be very familiar and very well understood, I'm sure, to this tutored audience, but some context about where we are at the moment in terms of the ambition and how we need to drive that down into reality. So there's a lot of idealistic ambition coming forward from our own government, with world-leading targets of, such as 68% reduction in emissions by 2030, a 78% emission reduction by 2035, and net zero by 2050. We await the government's announcement of a range of strategies about how those targets are going to be met, which are due imminently, in particular in relation to achieving net zero, heat and buildings, incredibly important, and transport decarbonisation. But as Councillor Aiken and Greg have already indicated, these will require local action. People live in urban places, in places which require city governance and city leaders to make sure these high ambitions are translated into real action on the ground. So the councils and local authorities right away across our country have not been shirking from that responsibility. So far, 230 councils have declared a climate emergency and are taking leadership in their local areas and in collaboration with others to make sure they're practical, realistic and achievable targets and outcomes are being delivered through those climate emergency action plans. And that means that we can all have ambitious targets for achieving net zero ahead of the 2050 target as identified by our own government. So if we go on to the next slide. So the challenge and the opportunity. So the green investment potential across our cities is enormous. It's incredible. So London and the 11 core cities have been working together to try to look at the aggregated total of that, and hence this commission. So we are responsible for 50% of the UK's economy as a collection of cities, and in our wider metropolitan areas, that represents 30 million people. And a huge number of businesses and enterprises are located in our cities as well. But as we've heard already, the barriers aren't entirely about finance or the availability of finance. It's the ability for us to create robust business cases and investment models that address issues of the scale, the longevity of the commitment, because this is not going to be done overnight, and the confidence to really bring forward those schemes to market and to make sure that citizens are engaged in that process as we go along. There's an enormous opportunity, but how do we do that? And what do we need to do to bring forward these propositions in a meaningful way, which has credibility in the marketplace, but also looks at the ways in which we can work together collaboratively to generate the opportunities for the wider issues that Susan was really eloquently talking about, in particular in relation to a just transition and the economic opportunities this will represent for our cities and the citizens we serve. So we go to the next slide. So this is an overview. All of us are committed to a net zero target. You can see the population characteristics here, and together we all represent 15% of the total UK CO2 output. If we go on to the next slide, please. So, as I've mentioned, we commissioned research from Eunomia and Bankers Without Borders to try to come forward with an understanding of how our overall climate commitments can be translated into investable propositions. So the methodology employed for that was to gather together all of those climate plans, extract the data from the plans at a city level, including any required infrastructure and associated costs. That then enables us to use a single methodology to analyze that data and to review that with city representatives, including any amendments to the data, because this is, as you understand, a very dynamic situation we're working within at the moment. So we haven't got a complete picture yet, but we do have some sound bases from us extrapolating information and data where there exist gaps. And the next phase of the data will be to reconvene to look at that and to give much more robust analysis as we move forward with the programme. If we go on to the next step, please, the next slide rather. I would say there are some methodological issues, which I will say up front. So the calculated costs I'm going to be talking about at the moment are estimates, and they will move probably upwards, and they're derived from city climate plans as they exist at the moment. Those are constantly under review and development. The second methodological note I'd like to bring to your attention is this represents the capital costs. It's not the wider revenue costs for the interventions we're talking about, nor does it include any of the potential savings or the cost of borrowing, for example, against these programs as we've designed them at the moment. And I would say there are evidence gaps. We're conscious of these evidence gaps, and we will be filling those evidence gaps to the best of our ability in the next few months. Go on to the next slide. So the total UK city investment need against the sectors are at the upper margin at £334 billion, and the mid-range at 206 billion, at the lower range 112. If we go on to the next slide, we can see that those are principally in these areas and these sectors identified. By far the largest at the moment is the building energy efficiency and low carbon heat source ambitions of each of the cities in domestic decarbonisation. And I don't think that's necessarily a surprise to any of us here, because there has been quite a considerable effort over a period of time to look at that area in particular. But there are also other areas such as transport and waste, along with commercial and industrial property decarbonisation, which is included in our figures. And that looks at a range of different measures, for example, from waste, looking at removing plastics, reforming collection systems, identifying alternative to heat from energy, for example, and also looking at ways in which we can look at citizen engagement to encourage greater waste reduction. In relation to some of the electricity generation activity, none of these are unfamiliar to people, but looking at rooftop solar, PV, wind generation, as well as looking at alternative heat sources across the sectors identified. So if we go on to the next slide. And these are the sort of areas where a lot of the cities are looking at. The ones in bold are very common across all of our cities in terms of the ways in which we can look at future funding sources. So some examples for you are about dedicated carbon management funds, looking at grant funding, looking at heat or energy as a service model to encourage further investment and to incentivize that. Some are looking at crowdfunding, community energy schemes and grants to support that in terms of renewable electricity generation. And particularly in relation to transport decarbonisation, there's some brilliant examples of using other instruments such as workplace parking levy to support alternative transport, and by doing so, reduce private car use, increase energy efficiency and reduce carbon. A lot of these identified ideas are absolutely at various different stages of development, and they are certainly looking at ways in which we can generate further vehicles for further investment to give certainty to the market. So if we go on to the next slide. And it's incredibly important, as Councillor Aikins indicated, and as Greg has mentioned earlier on, that we have appropriate governance of net zero at the city level, because delivering those pledges that nation states are making requires effective city government. So it's delightful for me, obviously as a chief executive of a local authority, that we are working collaboratively with a range of different actors in our communities to bring forward our net zero ambitions, because the city leadership also requires all of the sectors operating within cities to work collaboratively and cooperatively to deliver against these ambitious targets. So you can see, but overwhelmingly, there's a combined convention of multiple bodies looking at this. As Councillor Aiken has already indicated, in Glasgow, that's replicated right away across the country. And I would contend that's absolutely essential to mobilise all of the actors in localities to be able to make sure we're facing up to the challenge of net zero into the future. If you go to the next slide. So in summary, at the mid-range, we're looking at our investment requirement to deliver against net zero of £206 billion, and that represents a substantial sum of money which will require financing not only from government but also from the private sector. Domestic retrofit represents one of the greatest investment opportunities, and cities would benefit from further support to address gaps in decarbonisation plans, in particular in relation to creating the business cases and the investment models that are required to bring forward our ideas to market. So in terms of the next steps of our commission, onto the next slide, we will be looking at financing solutions and to meet those investment needs. And on our road to Glasgow, we'll be looking at ways of sharing those investment opportunities between the global investment market through investment portfolios, for example, such as investment prospectuses, as indicated by a Glasgow City Council, which is replicated in other cities across the UK. We want to promote the financing mechanisms to achieve net zero, adaptation and green growth in the UK. And in particular, that's going to be critically important for us to work collaboratively with those who have the investment resources to work to refine what we wish to do in terms of those ambitions as we go forward in the next few months. And we want to also create a political platform to position cities as delivery agents of net zero. And we'll do that through media, through blogs and interviews, through events, and of course, our COP26 itself. If we go on to the next slide, please. So the next steps is working with us collaboratively to shape the opportunity with investors and other actors as we move forward to COP26 and beyond. We absolutely must deliver, and then we must have the means to do so. So we are really, really interested in working collaboratively with others who've got the correct skills, capabilities to help us to refine our ideas so that those become investable propositions for the long-term future of our cities and for our country. And finally, we need to look at that green industrial revolution, which really does take all of our citizens forward and all of our communities in a fair, equitable and just way in order that everybody can have a chance in the green economy as we transition from a high intensity carbon economy to a future which makes sure that everybody has an opportunity of being successful. And I'll go on to the next slide, if I may. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Andrew.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a great overview, and again, setting out what's been doing, what the size of the challenges, what the opportunities are, and very much echoing what Greg was saying at the beginning, which is a real need now to think about how we shift the aspirations or the visions or the plans into schemes and projects that can be funded, financed and delivered. And I think that's a real critically important phase. So let's move on to our panel discussion and maybe get some views from those on the other side, those with deep pockets and lots of money to invest. We're going to hear from two different perspectives, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation. Our first panelist is Rachel Dickey, who's Executive Director at Grosvenor, and our second panelist is Xuan Chan, who's Head of ESG Real Estates at Legal and General Investment Management. Can I just check that both of you have your mics unmuted? Rachel, I think you're going to go first. You're going to set out some of your thoughts in this area, and then we'll hear from Xuan as well, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation. So Rachel, over to you.
Great, happy to. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can perfectly.
Good start. Great. Well, thank you for having me today. And whilst you said you're getting two different perspectives, I was actually at LNG until about 9 months ago. So something to.
We're going to get the real story. We'll get the real story from you.
Yeah, exactly. But no, since I moved from LNG at the end of last year, and I head up the investment team for Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland, responsible for our national investment programme. And for those of you who don't know about Grosvenor, we want to create places that are better for the next century and not just this one. We've been doing this for about 300 years, pioneering change and new ways of thinking about property. And as a privately owned family business, we can think long-term and act patiently with a freedom not often available to listed companies or public funders. We're working to redefine the relationship between landlords, tenants and communities based on a model of mutual success and offer transformational leadership on the environment, doing our bit to tackle the climate crisis. Our heartland is London's West End, where we support nearly 1,000 businesses and 11,000 residents. And in normal times, LBC, life before COVID, 60,000 workers and thousands of visitors each day. But we're also a diversified UK business. Just this month, we've completed acquisitions in Birmingham and Manchester. We developed, own and manage Liverpool One, which covers an area of 42 acres of Liverpool city centre. We also master plan and develop residential-led communities, like a 15,000 home development in Bermondsey, South London, and Barton Park, which is an NHS healthy new town with 900 homes, primary school, community facilities and infrastructure that we've delivered over the last 10 years with Oxford City Council. We see climate change as the biggest single risk to our business as well as society. And to build climate resilience and future-proof our portfolio, we've had to fundamentally transform how we operate, develop and manage our places. As a business, we're committed to being an environmental leader. We've been around for a long time, and we still want to exist and be relevant in another 350 years. But it is really challenging, and there's a lot of confusion. So what we have undertaken as a business is make it as simple as possible. And we've committed to these goals to help redefine what climate action could look like in our sector. So these goals create a framework for us to deliver lasting value for our customers, communities, and partners. They are zero carbon. By 2030, we aim to achieve zero carbon from our buildings, developments, and supply chain. Our full portfolio and 147 acres of public realm will also be climate positive by 2050. We're committed to zero waste, so sending zero non-hazardous waste to landfill from buildings and the developments under our control, and a significant net biodiversity gain, as well as being water neutral by 2050. And the key thing to all of this is about bringing our partners with us. So by 2030, all our suppliers will be compliant with our supply chain charter. And that's going to take a lot of collaboration, a lot of innovation, and really supporting each other to improve our outcomes. So as we know from this presentation and from others, the real estate sector has a huge part to play. 40% of carbon emissions globally are attributed to the built environment. And depending on which stat you choose, between 75 and 85% of buildings that will exist in 2050 are already built. And that's pretty representative of the makeup of our portfolio. And crucially, and I know this has come up in a couple of questions already, what we build today will shape the way that people live for decades. So that is the bit that we can do to start prompting behavioural change. So crucially, what are we doing about it? Well, since 2015, we've managed to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 29% and like-for-like energy consumption by 14% across the business. And over the past 2 years, we've accelerated our decarbonisation programme. In 2019, Grosvenor signed up to the Better Building Partnership Climate Change Commitment to publish how we would become a net zero carbon business by 2030. And we're one of 25 property companies in the UK taking part in this initiative. Last year, we published our net zero carbon pathway, which summarises our commitment and how we'll get there. It spells out exactly what we're going to do, by when, and how over the next, now 8.5 years. And we want to be completely transparent about it. One, because we know we can't do it alone, but also we've done a lot of work to get this far. And if we can help others get up the curve more quickly, that's absolutely something that we should be doing. We have to work together on this. So our pathway focuses on our biggest levers for change. One is reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions across our property portfolio, reducing embodied carbon in construction projects and developing buildings that are operationally net zero. And 3, reducing the carbon emissions from our supply chain, as I've already mentioned. We're targeting an emissions reduction of 52% between 2019 and 2030, with any residual emissions needing to be offset. But there's no silver bullet. So we've got a combination of measures in place, from a supply chain charter to help move our suppliers over to science-based targets and procuring energy from renewable sources. Green leases, where we're working with all of our occupiers to get them onto renewable energy. And environmental scorecards. So every single building that we own, we will have a way of measuring and tracking the improvements that we're making. And central to this, and achieving this reduction, is a £90 million ring-fence commitment for targeted energy saving and retrofit measures to help future-proof our buildings. This is in addition to the 25 million that we put in place in 2013. So taking our total investment to 115 million by 2030. It's really challenging. We manage about 2,500 units, mostly within the conservation area, and 500 grade 1 and grade 2 listed buildings and structures. And historic buildings are so central to our culture and our economy, but we also think they can play a leading role in the fight against climate change. I'm conscious of time, so I do have a bit of a suggestion about how we might do that perhaps, Andrew, we can pick up in the discussion if we've got time. But we do think that by pulling together to reduce, to retrofit heritage buildings, we could cut operational carbon emissions nationwide by an amount equivalent to 5% of the UK's carbon emissions associated with buildings in 2019. So a really significant shift. So I think, to sum up, there's no denying that it's going to be really hard and really expensive, and at a time when so much of the economy has struggled to survive the implications of the pandemic. This is just an additional and substantial financial burden. But it is a crisis, and there is real urgency, and we have to change the way that we do things and push each other to achieve better outcomes. And there are a lot of people doing some really fantastic things, and it's about rallying behind them and then holding those who don't to account. And I think that's going to be crucial over the coming years.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. Loads of great insights, lots of great questions coming in. And your point about heritage is a good reminder that we often focus on how we make new things more carbon efficient. But as you said, the thing about the built environment in our cities is that they're durable. They've been around for a very, very long time. So there's a big challenge about making what's already there more effective, as well as making sure whatever we put in the future is also very, very efficient. But several questions we're going to hear from Shwan in a second. It's just have this in your mind. Several questions from people asking about how your users, your customers, or your tenants, how are they responding to the things that you're proposing or the things that you're putting in place? How is that cascading through your network? So just have that in your mind as a question. But let's hear from Shwen. What's going on in legal in general? How are you kind of approaching this area? You're off mute. You should be able to just speak away. No, I can't hear you. Nope, still can't hear you. Try again. No. Put yourself on to mute and then unmute yourself again. There we go. Now unmute. Right. No, doesn't make a difference. Well, here we go. Try now. No. Okay, while you work that out, we'll kind of figure out, I'm sure colleagues in the background will be able to help you. Rachel, let's start with you, come to that question, which is about loads of questions on behaviour change. Yes, we can put in things in place, but actually, how have your tenants, users, customers, how have they responded to the lead that Grosvenor is showing?
So, generally speaking, positive. I think, and particularly the focus through the pandemic has changed the level of engagement that we have with our occupiers and our customers, and that's given us an opportunity to facilitate conversations that, to be honest, we probably should have been having a long time ago. But this kind of rebalancing and needing each other a lot more has helped that. I think, understandably, people are really conscious about cost and signing up to anything where they don't feel like they are in complete control. So that's one of the things we've just had to work through to explain exactly, how transparent we can be and why we think this is so important, and really trying to create an environment where people want to be part of our little ecosystem because we share the same values. So I think, as I said, little pushback once you've got over the kind of the control, and how do we know you're not ripping us off?
Yeah, no, quite. And yes, I suppose sometimes it's easy for you to take the long-term view, given you've been around for 300 years. Others are not able to, even if they would like to necessarily take that long-term view, which we'll need.
Yeah.
Okay, Shwen, let's have a go now. Let's see if I've got you. Say no, still can't hear you. So maybe you want to leave the platform and then rejoin and see if that sort of reboots your system. I'll give you a second on that.
Legal in general also doing excellent things, I can tell you that.
Very good, very good. But you can I'll leave you to determine which hat you want to put on. Rachel, another question we've had several on is, we heard it earlier on actually about from Greg about the need to de-risk. It's as well as developing the pipeline. Part of that is de-risking. How can cities and local authorities? What's their role then in helping to bring the pipeline to fruition? How can they help de-risk some of the issues that you see?
A lot of from an investor perspective, and less so from Grosvenor, because we own and manage places, and so we have a different involvement in cities than other investors.
Yes.
And to a certain extent, we kind of can create our own certainty. But I think that's where the local and national government come in terms of setting out that roadmap and giving investors the security that they that their investment will go as they think it will, and there's there's limited opportunity for a change of course, and ultimately for them to end up out of pocket at the end of it. So I think they are. Oh, looks like we have sound.
Yeah, it sounds like it. We heard you cough, Schwantz, so you're fine. Be careful what you say now. Carry on for a second, Rachel, and then I'll go to you. Go on.
Okay, well, I think it is this idea of kind of coordination and setting out the agenda and really the sort of the investment perspective for what that city could offer an investor. And I know from the people who are part of your committee, a lot of that is already happening, and it's this taking, as I said, consistent basis for decision making that will really help the investment community, as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant, great, thank you very much indeed. That was a great question from Andrew Hager, who put it into the chat function. So thank you very much for that, Andrew. Schwen, can we hear you?
I hope so.
We can. Yes, we can. Don't touch anything.
Technology. I honestly, I didn't touch anything before.
Wait, no.
But I'm glad it's working. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So I lead our ESG efforts in the real assets business within Legal and General Investment Management. So we are part of the L&G group, and LGIM, the global asset manager. We manage as an asset manager about 1.4 trillion sterling for external clients, which include our group as well. And as a group, we have committed to mitigating climate change and promoting essentially the transition to a low carbon economy and society. So we are also, as an asset manager, part of managing the biggest pool of pension funds in the UK and globally, which means we have a key role to play in helping provide net zero solutions to our clients, to pension funds across different asset classes. Now, within real assets, which is where I sit, we are long-term investors, and so real assets is about investing in the real economy. So we are investors in the built environment and infrastructure. So that's through the delivery of buildings, facilities. We invest in power regeneration, transportation, digital and social infrastructure as well. So it goes beyond the built environment within real assets. And in the context of, I guess, being an owner of a large property portfolio, we're not as vintage as Grosvenor states, but certainly, we have a very large commercial and our growing residential portfolio. We have been aligning our business to sustainability for over 10 years. But like Rachel, we have scaled out our ambitions by joining the Better Buildings Partnership Coalition and commitment to climate change, achieving net zero by 2050 or sooner. And we have also, like Grosvenor and all our other peers, published our roadmap to net zero. I guess what I want to say here is that I've found certainly the collaborative environment for all the parties, all the actors who share the same commitments is actually really staggering in a very positive way. The conversations that we're having are very transparent, very collaborative. And that's really important, I think, in getting us to the same target. So just in context, okay, because we are not only a sort of property owner, but we are also a global asset manager. So in our sort of wider investment management world, we have LGIM is one of 30 founding signatory global investors to the Net Zero Asset Manager initiative, which means we have committed to decarbonize our investment portfolio and to accelerate our contributions to achieving net zero. And part of that, we have established and launched what we call our Climate Impact Pledge, which essentially covers public equities and fixed income portfolios. And we use quantitative metrics to evaluate the sustainability and the carbon emission credentials of companies that we invest in. And that may result in us choosing to divest from these companies if they don't meet our criteria. And then coming back to sort of the built environment asset class, we have committed to reducing our operational carbon and energy intensity of our landlord control areas by 60% by 2030 as part of our science-based targets. And for our homes businesses within LNG, which is where Rachel came from, we have made a commitment to achieve net zero by operational by 2030. So I think what you probably take from this is there's lots of commitments from all the actors like ourselves, whether the actors like us as an asset manager, actors like Grosvenor and all our peers. But I just want to add that this is more than just a decarbonization story for us. It's important, but it's not just about managing the risk in a transition and sort of future proofing, but it's also about an opportunity for us to invest in rebuilding, right? Rebuilding a more resilient, more environmentally sustainable economy and communities. So as real asset investors, we believe we have a huge opportunity to make a real difference. For example, in regenerating the UK landscape, for better, for healthier communities. And to do this, we need to engage with the local authorities from the outset and to listen to the local communities. And that's about creating place-based impact, right, that serve all parts of the community, including the unserved. And that takes a different mindset and investment culture. So it's much more than just building homes or retrofitting homes and building multi-story offices or retail destinations, because it is very much about creating more inclusive communities within the built environment that we believe are longer lasting, safer and more resilient. Yeah. So it is about, as I think Councillor Atkins said, that it's about supporting a more just and equitable transition. And just to end, and then happy to go into the questions, is like to date, LNG, we've invested, I believe, more than 30 billion sterling into major urban regeneration schemes, and that includes some of the key core cities in the Commission: Manchester, Cardiff, Newcastle, and we've recently announced the latest regeneration project in Bristol, which I'm happy to go into a bit more detail. And of course, in the real assets business within LG, we are also investors in renewable energy projects, some of the largest renewable energy projects in the world that are contributing to some of the solutions that are required today to support the low carbon transition. So we are very much focused on solving the climate change dilemma, creating more resilient portfolios, but on the same track as having social inclusion through creating, affordable housing, ensuring there's sufficient training and employment opportunities as well in the local areas that we are invested in.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I know Greg is going to be reintroduced into the panel conversation. Greg, I'm going to go to Xuan for a second, but we had quite a few questions, almost going back to where you were right at the beginning, and particularly your points around the demand side is partly the priority, and then the questions in relation to the de-risking element that cities and local authorities can do. So just bear with me, have that in your mind as a sort of reflection. But Xuan, I just want to come back. It's a fairly straightforward question from Martin O'Brien, and his question is to you: where does the financial return come from? In a sense of when we think about these sorts of investments, how do you then think about how you are ultimately thinking about the financial return, and over what kind of time scale? Xuan, just give us a view on that.
It's a good question. I would say it depends. We have to be innovative, and that's really important, because this is about co-creating investment mechanisms that work for that particular regeneration project, for example, that particular community, that particular city, to meet its challenges and its targets. So I'll give you an example. So we invested in basically recently a regeneration project in Bristol with the Bristol City Council. It's a very exciting opportunity. We invested £350 million, which includes basically over 500 new homes, of which half are affordable. Includes conference, exhibition facilities, hotel facilities, major office buildings. That's the whole regen project. So for us, we're taking the development risk in that, and our return from a financial perspective will be obtained through the lease of those buildings in the future. And in terms of sort of tenure, it really varies. So again, what's important here is we are long-term investors. What's important here is about finding the right investment mechanisms, and we have on the many projects that we have invested in, we've had to tailor the investment structures to work for the beneficiaries, but at the same time, of course, we run a commercial business.
Yes.
And we will ensure that there's return generated. It's just that we see that coming up, that return comes in the future if we make the right investments today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So Greg, as I said, the questions about the demand aspect that you were very much talking about earlier on, and then the de-risking bit and how that might happen, and maybe aggregation has been part of the way to de-risk. But just say a little bit more about your thinking behind those comments.
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. And let me just say a very quick but sincere thank you to Rachel and Xuan for what they've just described and uncovered for us. It's one of the great advantages of working in the UK is that we do have companies like L&G and Grosvenor who are real pioneers in this space. So this is very helpful. I think that the broad answer to the set of questions that you've mentioned, Andrew, is firstly that nearly all of the things we're describing here involve a technology switch or an infrastructure switch, which have embedded within them new business models. And new business models create a kind of an uncertainty, a novel dimension, maybe some complexity, and they require some very careful shaping to make them work well as investment propositions. Now, some of that happens at the very local level, and Rachel described this brilliantly, that, it's about an individual authority with its planning powers, perhaps some of its own land and capital, reaching an agreement with an investor about how a site is going to be developed. And Xuan really sort of picked this out. But some of these things are also things that involve a kind of platform switch that has a national dimension. So, for example, the growth of e-buses, or the decarbonisation of public housing, or the decarbonisation of waste, Well, these involve actually aggregating things that happen locally that can come together at a national level. So really what we're talking about with this commission is how can we help individual cities to accelerate the attractiveness of their local strategies to investors like Grosvenor and L&G, but also many others. But also, how can we aggregate national opportunities so that we can crowd in much more money at the same time? Now, the de-risking element also has a local and a national dimension. De-risking at the local level, I think Rachel described rather brilliantly. You know, consistency of political intention, shared visions, a common agenda between the co-investors, the public sector, the private sector, citizen support and citizen engagement that in a sense guarantees a long-term framework for the kind of investment that's required here. So that local level is absolutely critical. That's about leadership, partnership, citizen engagement, understanding business disciplines, understanding financial disciplines, and being able to produce investment models and business cases that speak to that. That's a skill in itself. And that needs to be worked on. But at the national level, there are other things that we can do to de-risk. We're just about to create a UK infrastructure investment bank. This kind of national development bank, where it exists in other parts of the world, does a lot of work on de-risking. It works on, you know, investment readiness. It works on project preparation, due diligence, technical feasibility, perhaps provides guarantee schemes for the most novel or challenging propositions, and therefore creates an environment where blended finance, as well as public and private investment, are likely to emerge because there's somebody sitting behind that, either providing guarantees or providing technical assistance or providing replicatable investment models. That's the sort of stuff that really de-risks and therefore accelerates investment, which is really what we're trying to do. There's much more we could say about all of that, Andrew, but there's two aspects to it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Greg, so we're running towards the end, but I wanted to, again, we've had quite a few comments and questions, and start with you, Rachel, if I may. You know, Susan reminded us, Greg reminded us, you know, we really need reminding that, you know, we're having this conversation. The Commission is undertaking its work and is launched with COP not that far away. And I wonder what your thoughts are about, you know, A, how important COP is to this agenda, and then I suppose related to that is how do we make the most of COP, both in the run-up to it, the event itself, but then post-event, to really galvanise and create a momentum around this agenda. So just your sort of reflections and thoughts in that space, Rachel.
Yeah, I think it represents an enormous opportunity. Anything like this really focuses the mind and forces people to come together to articulate what we as a country kind of want to put forward as our agenda. So I think certainly we're using it to talk particularly around the heritage and carbon discussion, and we produced our own white paper to try to get to a point where we can align heritage protection and environmental sustainability through the national planning policy framework. Real tongue twister there. So yeah, I think it's come at a perfect time for us to accelerate and put ourselves on a different trajectory to making real changes.
Great. Ashwin, and it's similar, I suppose, you know, in terms of, you know, your agenda long term, you know, you're thinking of these things, but I mean, just the significance and the opportunity associated with COP now as we move towards the autumn.
Yeah, I think what you said there, Andrew, is important. It's not just COP. It's really post COP, I think. Because COP is, yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be lots of commitments, you know, governments shaking hands, taking nice press photos. But really, what we really need to mobilize post COP is this sort of call to action that call to net zero. How are we going to get there? What's the plan? What are we already doing? We are very much aligned with the UK GBC, the Green Buildings Council, and they've got lots of plans. They're launching at COP the sort of net zero life cycle carbon guidance. So for us, it's about finding the solutions to ensure that we all meet our objectives, in the right way, and as quickly as possible, making sure that all the stakeholders involved, from our occupiers to the local communities involved, are on board as well. And so there's a lot of work to do, but we think this is a huge opportunity, and we have a role to play in investing in it and enabling it, and we need to work together to create different investment models to suit different needs that are very place-based. And so I think the Commission's work in this is vital.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Greg, I suppose a similar question to you, but I was particularly struck, not least because I thought it was very pithy, but Susan's point, she said, nations pledge, but cities deliver. And we know when we get to COP, as Siobhan's already said, we're going to get set piece and announcements and all of that. How do we, what's the role of cities within that? But then how do we make sure that cities are at the forefront then of actually turning pledges into things that we can actually make a difference on the ground?
Well, it's a brilliant question, Andrew. And actually, it's one I've been thinking about a lot over the last few months as we've been preparing to launch this. So I think on the one hand, we need to really make the case, as I tried to in my opening remarks, that the place-based strategies are absolutely a critical complement to the sector-based strategies. There is I think, a risk that we think that all we have to do is decarbonize energy, industry, mobility, and real estate, and the net result is going to be net zero. Actually, I don't think it's like that. I think that citizen behavior, market behavior, I think that there are externalities that occur in these. If you link up a low carbon form of transport with a high carbon building, actually the net effect is nothing that's helpful to you. So it's at the place-based level, as I tried to explain, that you can integrate the sectors, you can accelerate the multipliers, you can really influence citizen behavior around consumption, around waste, around mobility, travel. You can influence citizen behavior, I think, around buildings and around energy and how things are spent. So this is what city leaders do. I mean, if you're living in Glasgow at the moment and you hear Councillor Susan Aitken saying the sorts of things you heard her say today, every day, you do start to think differently. And there's something about a city leader, something about a city that creates the opportunity to accelerate behavior change. So the first thing I think we have to do is to make that very visible in this conversation. It's not just about big sector plays, it's actually about places too. Then the second thing I think we have to do is to really highlight the good practices. And that's why it's great to have Rachel and Shwen here. That's why it's great to have all of the core cities and all of the London boroughs in this partnership demonstrating their very best. When you look at the best of what's happening in the UK, actually we're doing really well on emission zones, on low traffic neighborhoods. We're doing well on reclaiming space, on encouraging people to change the way they travel. There are many things that are happening in the UK. Our real estate community, our leaders in relation to green buildings, to decarbonisation of buildings. So we need to get confident about the things we're good at and demonstrate how they work at the local level. And I think this will give people the realization that place-based strategies matter. We're actually good at some of this stuff, and we've got things that are useful for the rest of the world. And then the confident investment models that we're talking about in this commission, building the business case, building the investment platforms, making it easier for the good investors to spread the investment across a larger number of cities and places. That's what we have to do, I think, and that's what will position, I believe, cities as being central to this. And I take Susan's point entirely. The governments make the pledges, but unless the private sector and the cities are prepared to work together to make this happen, these pledges might be empty. And that's a risk, and that's what this commission's all about.
Brilliant. It's a great note. We could carry on. I've hundreds more questions and thoughts to put to Rachel and Siobhan, but unfortunately, we are very, very nearly at 5 o'clock, and 5 o'clock is our end time. I want to thank Rachel and Siobhan for their contributions to the panel. Very much appreciated, and indeed to Susan and to Niall for their earlier contributions as well. And then, Greg, to hand back to you for your final reflections and thoughts in terms of where we go next. Greg, back to you.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Thank you to you, and I'd like to reiterate your thanks to Rachel and Siobhan, and of course to Susan and Niall as well. Look, this is an attempt to do something that hasn't been done before. All of the core cities, all of the London boroughs, working together with the Connected Places Catapult to have a different conversation with private finance, with investors, developers and others, to be purposeful and practical, and to add another cylinder to the net zero engine, if you want to put it at its most simple. It's a sincere intent. We're going to work hard at this in a focused way over the next period of time. You heard Niall say there'll be another report at COP, which will really talk about what's working. What we intend to do then is to sequence a series of engagements between the cities and the private sector. We invite the government to be an active partner. We want the UK Infrastructure Investment Bank to be active in this. But we won't stop this project until we've made some substantial progress. And the sooner we do that, the better. We can't afford, I think, as I said right at the start, to be living in a planet where we're on our way to 10 billion people. 10,000 cities is the only environmentally efficient way to accommodate that population. In the UK, we have an opportunity to demonstrate that we're back in the lead in producing not just the post-industrial cities that Susan spoke about, or the post-pandemic cities that we're all talking about, but we have the opportunity to demonstrate that we know how to apply our brilliant financial expertise with the DNA of our wonderful cities to create something that is truly transformative. And we intend to stick with this until we've done it. So thank you very much. Andrew, I think we're supposed to tell people that there is going to be some networking time now where people will be thrown together if they stay online and click the right tabs with other people they may or may not know to continue the conversation. And we hope that you'll all enjoy doing that. But once again, thank you very much.